phone.
गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गणेश शॉट। गणेश शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। टुडे वी आर गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट द कोल्ड पॉलिटिक्स एंड hot economics of Chinese FDI. Why have I taken this again? After all, I discussed this 3 days back when the news started coming out. Well, uh, I've done that for a very simple reason. Because there's a Chinese perspective also to this whole story. And ये जो कोल्ड पॉलिटिक्स और हॉट इकोनॉमिक्स के बारे में हम जो बात कर रहे हैं वो है इट्स अबाउट द चाइनीज पर्सपेक्टिव एंड व्हाट दे फील अबाउट दिस होल स्टोरी एंड दिस terminology cold politics and hot economics come from China and it's a very well researched paper which has come out from one of their think tanks which I'll share with you shortly. But before that, let me see if I can fix my camera. Right, let me see once again. And no, today there's some problem with my camera, so I'm going with my laptop camera, which is not so good. Okay, anyway, that's not the issue. Let's take the things head on. Okay, the whole thing started with this thing by our economic advisor who felt in the economic survey that the Chinese direct investment should come in. And this was in some manner okayed by our finance minister also. The matter doesn't end there. There's a debate on everything. So I said, look, where does it go? So I'll start now from outside. This article just come out in guancha.cn, right? This is a Chinese website. It's a news site which carries a lot of analysis, everything. A lot of people go by what is mentioned in Guancha and what opinions are mentioned in Guancha, because Guancha is a well-reputed platform in China. Now, of course, this news is about India, and naturally, when you see our external affairs minister, they're talking about that. So, what does he say? Okay, yeah. Now, our foreign minister, we know he's Subramaniam Jaishankar, but the Chinese call him Su Jisheng. So, what has he said in the Quad meeting in Tokyo? So, he says when talking about bilateral relations, about China, he said the countries' relations were not too good and situation was abnormal. And because there was a conflict between China and India, in 2020, he was referring to the Eastern Ladakh, and the problem is not fully solved and the consequences continue to exist. These are the wordings which the Chinese are reading in Chinese. I've just translated it straight and given it to you. So don't think it's a matter of my English, it is theirs. Now what they say, he says he tried to shift the blame to China, claiming that this goal can be only achieved if China respects the agreement, which obviously they'll say no. Okay, but then just before the Quad meeting, Wang Yi and Mr. Jaishankar met at Vientiane. Vientiane mein, on July 25th, 4 days back, in the East Asia Summit. Now, what does it say? Now, as per the Chinese report, mind you, as per the Chinese report, okay, Jiasheng, okay, that is Jaishankar, that India and China are two populous countries, emerging economies, ancient civilization with a long history. Maintaining stable and predictable development of bilateral relations is fully in line with the interests of both sides and of special significance for maintaining regional peace and promoting multipolarization. So far, all diplomatic talk. India's China's interests are widely blended, and it is also facing the shadow of the border situation. This, that's what the Chinese are now talking of. We have common interests. We have a border situation. Forget about the border. Let's talk about everything else. Now, this sentence, what I'm going to now talk about, is something which I couldn't understand. However, India is willing to use historical vision, strategic thinking, and open attitude to find solutions to differences and promote bilateral relations back to a positive and constructive track. This is what is reported there, which means that we are trying to bend towards them. So the view in China is, while all this is going on, we don't mind forgetting about the border. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay, and in that, there's two sides agreed to work together to maintain peace and tranquility, promote new progress, and all that. Now, David Goldman, he's an American analyst. He's done this, analysis in Asia Times. It's an article in 2000 of July 26th. I'll come back to this later. Says India relationship have warmed up, piercing the daydream of United States. So इसका मतलब यह है कि अगर चाइना और इंडिया का मेल जोल हो गया तो यूएसए आउट, तो ये इनका बड़ा मुद्दा है और ये मुद्दा बार बार आता रहता है हर जगह इनका लिखाई में और इनका राइटिंग्स में और इनका एनालिसिस में. Right. Now, what does the article say? It pointed out that although the United States regards India as a so-called democratic force to check and balance, so-called is introduced by China, okay, and balance China and India, two major Asian economies and countries, are developing in the direction of strengthening economic cooperation and reducing strategic conflicts. So, what our economic survey says is now mirrored by David Goldman in Asia Times, and now this is taken back into China. So now Chinese people are reading this, that India wants to go back to China. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay. The article lists the huge gap between China and India in infrastructure, financial strength, and human resources. Pro China. I wouldn't be surprised if this whole story was planted by China. Okay. It is believed that the economic ties between China and India are getting closer and closer, and India needs Chinese investment and technology, which have contributed to easing the Sino-Indian relations. So here it is. They very clearly it is now being mentioned that come closer to us for economics. You need us, and hence, we can ease off on the border. But that's inducement. Okay, we all know how much it will stand is anybody's guess. Okay, what next? This is the same story which says India approaches China, piercing America's daydream. It's all in same guacha, and all this same thing. By and large, it's a repeat. India needs Chinese investment. The economic survey to the parliament calls for direct investment. Now, in the article, he says India's prime minister also visited Russia to meet Putin. India hopes that Russia will mediate the Sino-Indian border conflict, which Russia has not done so far. Has never done this in our entire history. Although such mediation is not formal, it will trigger a diplomatic revolution, which is a mockery for the US attempt to attract Asian countries to deal with China. India relies on China's supply, ye wo, wagara, wagara, wagara. Now, here is the cliche. He says, China does not want to impose an order on Asia, which is contrary to all our thinking. Okay. China does not intend to get involved in the governance of its neighbors, but hopes to include Asia in a broader economic field. China can bring stability to the region through economic development. So, in a roundabout manner, he says, look, China has to be primal in Asia. That is what this Asia Times chap says. It is very clearly planted. Okay. And then, of course, this article has come before the last article which I showed you. That has come out yesterday. In fact, yesterday it came out, today I accessed it. Right. Now, Wang Yi says important impact beyond the scope of bilateral relations. The strategic trajectory of both countries are common. Handling, yeah, handling of differences between the two sides should reflect the political wisdom of the two civilizations. So he's looking at political wisdom, whereas, and what does political wisdom say? It says keep the border out. Their political wisdom. But that's not the case for us. And he stressed the return of Sino-Indian relations to the right track in the interests of both sides and common expectation of the global south. तो एक नया ट्रैक खोल रहे हैं ये. Okay. Of course, whatever, again, Su Jisheng is, our external affairs minister, all this same thing. The last but one, India, China's interests are widely blended and it is also facing the shadow of the border situation. So the border situation, our external affairs minister has very clearly put it out in, on 2 consecutive days. It has come out in China. But India is willing to use historical vision, as if we are leaning towards it, as if our whole story is softening. So the external affairs minister has conveyed cold politics. But even in that cold politics, there is a certain amount of, I wouldn't say back down, a certain amount of, saying, okay, we'll look at what China has to offer, right? And obviously, there is a very clear understanding that we need to go with China for investment and technology and things like that. Okay, now this is where I'll go for a very serious article which I came across. Right? What is this? What does this say? This is the article. CICIR. SICR, or it is as it is called. It is China Institute of Contemporary International Research. It's a very serious think tank. It does a lot of analysis on India. And in June, they come out with analysis of this whole story. What is this analysis? The dynamics of Sino-Indian economic and trade relations during Modi 3.0. It's a very, very, very balanced. I wouldn't say balanced. It's balanced towards China. It's a very, very you know well-researched paper which they put out. And when you read it, it somehow, it somehow resonates with what our economic advisor has come out and what our industry is talking of and our political situation, because in this paper is tackled all. So let's go through this paper because this is important to understand. I'm not going to give any prescriptions today, but you need to understand the whole story. That's why this thing. Okay, what does he say? He says Sino-Indian economic and trade relations will continue to develop as per this chap, Hushe Singh. Sino-Indian political relations, especially strategic mutual trust, has a different logic. So he's also accepting that the strategic relationship might not change, but economic and trade relations will continue to develop. They're already looking at both of these. That's where I got this. He's written this. This is a Chinese heading. There's a state of cold politics and hot economics will be the norm. Now, their way of looking at it is this cold politics is freezing the political system or the political issue or the geopolitical issue or the border issue. And their prediction and their thing is that, okay, economic relations will continue. In this entire paper, he doesn't mention that it's China's requirement also, because they're facing a downturn. And if they tap into India's markets and invest into India, it's a bonanza for them. It might just turn around their economy. Okay, people will say, no, India's trade is only 3%, there's that. I don't believe in all that nonsense. This might just be the turn which China needs for things to come back. So that is why there's a major analysis on one of their leading think tanks. And this has been there for the past 1 month. I didn't know about it until I searched. I thought, look, I was a little perturbed and so I searched. Okay. What does he say? He says the economic and social development cooperation between China and small South Asian countries is a trend that cannot be stopped by any opposing forces. Oh, no, this is wrong. This is not the one. I'll come back to this later. Okay. Then, okay. Sorry, that's a wrong slide, got misplaced. Now he says there are three major driving forces of dynamics of bilateral economic and trade relations between India and China. What are these three logics? He says there's a domestic political logic in India, logic of New Delhi's pursuit of Viksit Bharat by 2047, and logic of Modi government's strategic appeal to transform India into a factory of the world. Very logical as per this whole story. Now, what does he say? He analyzes the domestic political logic in India very, very, very in depth. He says BJP has a below par performance. There is food inflation and joblessness as per their thing, and it is there because food prices have shot up in India beyond a level which I couldn't imagine. People feel the slowdown in economic growth, and there's a lack of trickle down effect. That is, there's growth happening at the top, but it's not trickling down below. Okay. And then he says there's no significant improvement in employment rates. And the whole story, he says, based on 2024 India employment report, which is some international report which I couldn't lay my hands on. Now, there's a broader challenge, as per him, of sustaining the movement of labor towards more productive sectors. He's shown out how that our labor or our basic demographic dividend, जो हम बोलते हैं, the weaknesses of the whole story. Okay, what then he says, lack of nice employment often means a lack of decent life. If that happens, a social story will start going down. Important to understand this, right? Now, here comes the important last two lines. To help people manage the cost of daily living and stabilize prices, okay, the Modi government in recent years has been striving to maintain a considerable scale of imports from China at competitive price. That means our government is already allowing imports from China. When people ask me many times, why are we not reducing the trade deficit? Here is the answer. He has analyzed it to say the government has been importing things at cheap rate from China to make life people easy for us. You know, your cheap electronics and cheap stuff. China ka maal jo hum bolte hain. It is safe to say, this is his conclusion, to say that importing products, especially with extremely competitive price from China, will continue to be the politically correct strategy for Modi 3.0. So the government will continue to do this. So if you think that our trade deficit will go, as per him, it will not go. As per him, it will go ulta, which is happening, which is the reality on ground. Okay. All right. This approach is aimed at maintaining economic stability and managing the cost of living for the Indian population. So there's a domestic political logic. Unless this is not met, the chances of Modi ji coming back for the fourth term unprecedented or BJP regaining is a question mark as per him. That's what he's looking at it ahead. Okay. What is the logic of Viksit Bharat? Now, he says industrial substitution strategy is a critical part in promoting Viksit Bharat. That means whatever is being produced abroad needs to be produced in India as a substitute for whatever is coming from elsewhere. That's the point. He also quotes the success which was achieved by India in near complete localization of the entire smartphone production system, except of course chips and batteries which you had to import. But as per him, the smartphone system, a lot of Indian companies have localized it using this import substitution strategy. And this will certainly continue to strive. That is, India will certainly continue its strive to replicate the smartphone manufacturing success in other sectors such as solar panels, electric vehicles, lithium batteries, pharmaceutical, etc., 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 moving India's manufacturing towards high-end, intelligent, and green systems. That's our aim. And this, he says, is the area where China still leads. Now, the industrial substitution strategy of the Modi government is in its third term. If it is to succeed in these areas, it will necessitate continued cooperation with Chinese enterprises in production and supply chains, with importing in particularly the key raw materials, core components, high quality capital goods in good prices. So virtually in this paper, he is analyzing that India has no choice but to go back to China. Okay. Now the question is, has our government failed? Or has it not taken some extraordinary steps? When he talks of key raw materials, he's talking of API. So in case, I mean, the way I look at it, in case we have to go in for Chinese investment, at least certain areas where there is, where we can get off with special effort should also be done parallelly, like in API, so that our drug industry is not subservient to China. Or get FDI in only certain industries where we are very focused with lot of things. Because I am very sure of one thing: if FDI comes in, influence will come. If influence will come, corruption will follow. If corruption follows, slowly they'll expand. This is what happened. Those of you who don't know or who have not seen this happen, I've seen the API industry break bit by bit in front of our country, in my eyes, where China started dominating. I've seen, if you follow the Sterlite factory deal, or rather the why Sterlite factory, which was producing copper in India, broke, is because of Chinese interference. If I tell you the story, you'll be amazed. Sterlite was there in Tuticorin. It was producing copper. We were a net exporter of copper with that factory. But there were problems of pollution. People died. There was issue of cancer and all that. Now here comes the thing. Issues which were thrown up between communities, Christians and non-Christians, or Hindus and Christians. Then local administration was state administration. State administration was the central administration. DMK was as AIDMK. All these issues came up in the Sterlite plant. Ultimately, what happened? We closed. And then what happened? The whole production went to China. So we are now net importer of China because Sterlite is closed. And now it is coming out, China had a large hand in closing it. So the moment there is FDI in India, all these stunts will start. They will never allow you to go. Okay. And all our governments were incapable of seeing the light of the day. Look, कुछ तो करो, उसको सॉर्ट आउट करो. अगर पोल्यूशन है तो फैक्ट्री के ऊपर पाबंदी लगाओ, कुछ नॉन पोल्यूटिंग एजेंडा करो. ओके, 1 महीने के लिए, 2 महीने के लिए, 6 महीने के लिए उस फैक्ट्री को बंद करो और सब ठीक करो. कॉम्पनसेशन देना है तो कॉम्पनसेशन दो. सब कुछ करो, बट स्ट्रेटेजिकली एंश्योर दैट फैक्ट्री डजंट क्लोज. बट वी वर हेल्पलेस. यही प्रॉब्लम है हमारा इंडिया में, अगर वो आ गए तो. Okay, then he says logic of government's strategic appeal to transform into a factory of the world. Now he says it's postponed already twice. ये फैक्ट्री ऑफ द वर्ल्ड बन नहीं रहा। तो अगर फैक्ट्री ऑफ द वर्ल्ड नहीं बन रहा है और बाकी सब घूम लिया आप लोगों ने, तो आपको और कोई चारा नहीं है बट टू कम टू इंडिया, टू कम टू चाइना। देन this is a serious discussion he is having. Strong international competitiveness of made in China, the continual slump in foreign investment into India, and restrictions imposed by five flows: flow of labor, land, materials, technology, and capital, means that the Make in India initiative has problems and it cannot compete internationally. This is their analysis and probably right also. He says Modi 3.0 government's difficulties in advancing or implementing major reforms in land, labor, taxation, and rural sectors due to coalition governments. See, his logic. You couldn't do farm laws when you are in majority. How can you do land, labor, taxation, and rural sector reform when you are in coalition? Okay. So he says Make in India can only succeed if there is import of cost effective goods from China and FDI from China. He's making a case. He's making an analysis. And this analysis is not for us. This analysis is probably for his government, how to deal with the whole story. ठीक है, मैं तो सिर्फ अभी आज क्या आई मीन अगर हिंदी में बोलना है, मैं तो दुश्मन के मन पढ़ रहा हूँ और आपको बता रहा हूँ वो लोग क्या सोच रहे हैं. In sectors such as heavy machinery, electromechanical products, telecommunication, critical parts of household appliances, Indian manufacturers often find no alternative suppliers outside China and ultimately have to rely on Chinese products if they want to sharpen the competitive edge of their India-made products in the international market. So if you want to make your industry internationally competitive, he says India has to go to China. And that's what virtually, I think, the economic advisor has also said. So does it reflect the failure of the government, the failure of the industry, the failure of the state governments or the central governments, and what? And now you're in a coalition system, which is even worse. So it's a very tough decisions which you have to take now. Okay. And then he goes on to say, politicization and securitization of bilateral economic and trade relationship has been disturbing. It has disturbed the whole equation between India and China. And he says it hurts India more than China because China doesn't depend on India for its overall GDP. The dependence is very less, but India depends a lot on China for import. Okay. But he also says trade deficit with China sparks anti-India sentiments in India, anti-China sentiments in India. The more important worrying thing in this is the trade deficit could become a lasting phenomenon in bilateral trade. It might be permanent in nature. And if it is permanent in dependence, it will be a permanent distance between India and China also. That's what he is talking of. Okay? And if the Modi government, as per him, wants to do localization, Indianization, all that, and Chinese enterprises have to operate in India, but they'll have a problem. If they have a problem, which like others have had, then there will be retaliatory measures from China. And where will those retaliatory measures come? It might come in Indian Ocean, it might come in Himalayas, it can come anywhere. Or it might come through Pakistan. So it's not a simple thing that you still go and get investment from there and you think you will get out of this problem. I don't know whether the government has thought through all this. There'll still be people like you and I who don't like it. We'll create problems and those problems will come up. So I think the government has to be very clear how they're going to handle this situation. Why am I doing this program a second time? Because, you know, एक चुरली छोड़ दिया इन हिंदी जैसे वो चुरली छोड़ दिया कि भाई ये छोड़ दिया देखते हैं क्या होगा और धीरे धीरे आगे बढ़ाएंगे. But the problem is the people who are going to pay for this are you and I. Governments come and go, politicians come and go. आज to be in power, they might do anything. That's the problem with the politicians. I mean, it is across the board. I'm not talking of any one politician. Okay. Then he's picked up a very, sensitive issue. He says the internal dynamics within India between policies in the north and south regarding China present another layer of complexity. He says state governments, local conglomerates, small to medium enterprises, especially in southern regions, may seek to enhance cooperation with Chinese businesses and increase imports from China. This strategy serves as a counterbalance to the pressures from the BJP governed northern states. We're now talking of politics or domestic politics. And to a large extent, it might be true. And also the large conglomerates favored by Modi or BJP. He's referring to Adani, Ambani, and all that. So, if this trap has to be avoided, I think the government has to take a view, a considered view. All this has to be considered. Okay. आज के दिन तो विकसित भारत तो साउथ में है, नॉर्थ में थोड़ी ना है. बट पॉलिटिकल कंट्रोल नॉर्थ में है, एज पर हिम. No, if there's a divergence between the state and the central government, there's a problem. And at this point of time, it is there. And we know very well, let's do some soul searching honestly. We know there's a problem between our state and central government if this state government is not a BJP government. And most progressive governments are not with the BJP. That's the problem. He says the policy divergence between the north and the south and between state and central governments naturally impact the stability of Sino-Indian economic and trade relations. He's talking sense. So if we know this is the way the enemy is thinking, how do you think? Do we have a status paper? That's the point. Because anyway, you have a trade deficit. You cannot wish it away. Year by year, your trade deficit is going up. Now you want to get FDI also. How do you want to handle all this? You don't know. We have no clarity. Okay. And he's spoken of Andhra Pradesh in this paper. If you read this paper, you'll see Andhra Pradesh getting mentioned. So there's a coalition politics story coming out. Now I went to another website. Okay. Just to give you the idea of cold politics, right? This is Shanghai Institute of Strategic Studies. Right. There he is saying China Bangladesh cooperation can't be stopped by opposition from hegemonic powers. Which is the hegemonic power? It is India he's talking of. And to some extent USA, but largely India. What does he say? He says the factor influencing Sino-Indian economic and trade relations involves third-party influences and regional dynamics. Says China is expanding its, Belt and Road, getting all these countries part of the Belt and Road, strengthening their economic and trade ties, integrating their economies into a multilateral trade system, and they are being allied with Chinese interests, right? I mean, he says incorporating Bangladesh and Sri Lanka into RCEP and supporting Bangladesh application to join BRICS. So China wants, all our neighbors, we know that they've been doing it. But whereas India is doing something else. Okay. We are talking of BIMSTEC and we are talking of BBIN, we are talking of IMEC and all that, Sagar and all that. He says both these are operating at cross purposes with each other. Okay, now I'll go back. This is the thing. Sorry. Yeah, this is what that paper says. The economic and social development cooperation between China and small countries is a trend that cannot be stopped by any opposing force. Now, these countries, he says, faces restraints from or problems when they start cooperating with China, and that problems come from us, India. It may provoke opposition from some hegemonistic countries. The governments and the allies in those countries, this paper argues, knows all this. And they say China never interferes in their internal affairs, so they are eager to cooperate with China, all of them. But what they don't say is when problems happen, China let it go and goes like it happened in Sri Lanka. There is a contradiction between the economic and social development and political security and regime stability can only be resolved by unity of political forces in this country. So China will not interfere. But implicitly, he says India will interfere. And he says that is why there's an India out campaign in these small countries. And now, right? India is to be blamed. So there's the politics of the whole story. Like I said, economics is one, cold politics, hot economics. So the cold politics are what I'm trying to now show you. Okay, now I'll show you another article from Guancha which I downloaded and I did translate and I put it across. He says this, you're a threat also to China. That's the point. I might say that it's bad to get FDI from China. China is also hesitant to give you FDI. He says the growing population makes India's internal market large enough with huge domestic demand to compensate for anti-globalization and trend worldwide. He says China's economy has been striving to do this for a long time with limited success. So he says, look, if I invest into India and India starts producing, even if it cannot, export, its own consumption market will ensure that nothing goes wrong. But in China, I can't afford to do that. Right. And they also feel that India's situation is something like what China's situation was in early 2000. And one day, he says, the Indian economy will take off. Okay. And they also prove it with facts. He says penetration and popularity of mobile internet in India is way higher than that in China in 2000s, which can further propel an information technology driven economic development in India. What Xi Jinping says, technology, intellectualization, informatization, they say has already happened in India. And they might outperform China's development experience in terms of quality and pace. So, if you look at this whole story, there's a whole lot of issues which I don't know whether they have been taken into account. There are problems with the Chinese talk of. Of course, they are projecting. As much as we want FDI from them, in one paper he says, go, give it. In the other paper he says, if you give it, we are going to have a problem. And if India's economy takes off, which it will, then it will be detrimental to us. It's a complex game. Well, has this complex game been thought through? I don't see any debate of this nature in our papers. I mean, we are going into this without seeing what the other country feels. I'm amazed. Right. So my view is that, well, after reading all this, there might be sectors in which you want FDI. You still want and you want, and there's no doubt. Let's not have any doubt. Uh, it's not. If not from China, you need FDI from somewhere else. One. That's a hard reality. The second hard reality, which all of us have to face, is that our government has not done as well as we thought it should have. Okay, give it time. I'm not against the government. But the coalition politics have a different dharma altogether. So where is this all going to meet? And the states which can absorb this capital and perform are states which are governed by opposition parties. I'm talking of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. आंध्रा में देखेंगे क्या होगा. So there is a issue of there's a layer of internal politics, internal governance. Unless the central government can take everyone along, I don't think this will go far. And if it goes, if we get into this without thinking too much, we might be ending up in a big problem. We might have compromised our security, our, our physical sovereignty and security, military capability, and also our economic capability we would have compromised. That's the point. I've given you too many layers. I know it might sound quite jumbled up, but हालत ही ऐसा है. There's opportunity, there's danger. What is the opportunity? What is the danger? इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर को क्या है, आज है इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर, कल चला जाएगा कहीं यूनिवर्सिटी में चला जाएगा, ये भी फिरंग यूनिवर्सिटी में जाकर बैठ जाएगा. आप और हम बैठते रहेंगे, ये गन शॉट चलता रहेगा, या और कोई. Okay, so this is what I had to say.